Am I relying too much on my own perception, my own understanding of a circumstance and saying, this is horrible, this is irredeemable, this shouldn't be happening, and God has been whispering, no, let the peace of Christ call the shots here. Let it rule, let it umpire in this circumstance.
Ian, welcome back to the show. 20 minutes into just talking, I said, hey, let's just hit record and see what happens. I'm airing this thing tomorrow at the time we're recording this, and so here we go.
Let's go.
We're landing the plane on this formation series, and bro, I'm just going to say this publicly. I'm not sure there's really anyone I'd rather close this chapter out with than you, because I love the way your mind works, and the way you think is just inspiring to me. We're talking about formation today, and so I'm glad you're here. Welcome,
man. Thank you, by the way, and likewise, bro. It's honestly, it's an honor, and I love what you're doing at a macro level, but even listening to the conversations in this series, dude. I think what you're doing is so timely, so important. So honored to be here, man. Thank you.
I'm really positioning myself, and I know the folks joined with us right now are leaning in as well. I've really wanted to approach this year in formation with like, okay, I'm going to go in this totally as a novice. So when Rolheiser was on, I mean, I was looking for things that would probe me and poke me and shape me, and I see that in your heart too. So I'm excited for where I think we're going to head today. You ready?
Yeah. Likewise. Let's go.
Okay. All right. So I don't know if it's your statement, but I saw this on Instagram, and I'm like, yeah, this is where I want to start with, Ian. You were speaking at the church, and I saw this on the screen. God can do more with your surrender than you can do with your control. Take it wherever you want. I think there's a lot to say.
Well, the first thing is first, that is not original to me. There's a bunch of floating memes all over the place. I couldn't find who actually said it first. So if you find out, please let me know. But for the same reason, it just resonated with me. The story that I told was when I was trying to learn guitar in high school. I bought this real kind of garbage guitar and wasn't making anything sound good at all. And I kept blaming like, it's just a cheap guitar. Or whatever, until a buddy of mine came over who'd been playing guitar for a decade plus, and he picked up this guitar and just made it sing. And I was like, oh, it wasn't the guitar's problem. It was whose hands it was in. And I was thinking about in my own life, and that, this is the benefit, I think, of getting a little older. I now have some data points where I just so tightly clung to control, thinking not only I had to, but this is the best path forward. And realizing how much more the Lord has done in my heart and in the hearts of those close to me when I can loosen my grip a little bit. When we talk about every week we receive communion, we don't take it. We're not taking anything from Jesus, but it's really hard to receive something if you're clinging to something else. And I feel like God just began to show me all these areas I was white knuckling something other than him. And a lot of them were like good things, it wasn't like some deep, dark addiction or something. That's often, I think, how it works for me is like, yeah, you're clinging to good things and missing the best things. And that for me has become the narrative of learning to surrender and realizing that I have a long way to go, man. That's the weird thing about preaching or writing or communicating. You can get a concept in your head, and then when you invite people to really take an x-ray of your life, you realize, like, oh yeah, I got a lot of growing to do there. And it wasn't just like a nice pithy truism. I now can look over my shoulder and say, yeah, Lord, you actually did way more in that season when I finally did tap out than I did of 10 years of striving on my own. That almost sounds cliche, to be honest. But I can't unsee it now. It's like, oh, Lord, more of that, please. I don't like how much I often have to be kind of pinned to the mat before I surrender. I wish I could tell you, man, like the Lord whispers and I am just obedient. I want to be there one day. I tend to be a little more thick-headed. And so it's not just about surrender for me. It's wanting to prayerfully surrendering more quickly. I know that ultimately, like it'll get there, but I'm like, Lord, let's not do this. I don't want to make you have to pin me to the mat again. Like, help me to hear the voice of the shepherd and just follow. And yeah, that's kind of the season I'm in right now, I think.
The cost value trade-off to surrender is something I'm thinking about as you're saying this, because not to overgeneralize, but I think surrender is something we participate in and choose, and then in many ways, like the last 9 months of my life, there has been no other option.
Wow. Yeah.
How's it been for you in that regard? And like, what is that cost value trade-off where, I mean, using your life as a case study, you say, okay, I could have never imagined on the other side of this, it looking like this, or like, whoa. But getting to the place of the heart posture of saying, Lord, have your way in me. I give you the reins. Takes what? The cost value trade-off is huge.
Such a good question. Something I realized was how common it was for me to trust God with my eternity, but not my present. Like this idea of you can have future me, and yet I was still fighting for control in the present. And I kind of had to come to terms with the fact that the future's not even really mine to surrender. I don't have it. It's not there. All any of us really have is this moment and then this moment. This is Brother Lawrence's practicing the presence of God. This is, I think we often fool ourselves into thinking, well, I'm 80% there because I've trusted him with this nebulous future. I would argue that maybe isn't actually surrender. Because right here and now, the thing that is either weighing on me, or that I'm excited about, or that I'm grieving, or that I'm ruminating on, or that I'm fixated with, that is where surrender begins for me. And obviously there's a lot we could talk about, trauma and healing and things in the past that you need to, that's part of the work that we do as pastors, is helping people make sense of the past. We're storied creatures. So when everything feels like a jumbled mess of data, and we can't see the, what Leonard Sweet calls the narrow form, then it just feels like chaos. So that's part of it. But I, as just a human guy in real time, it is amazing to me how persistent my spiritual amnesia can be, where God will deliver, I'll thank him briefly, move on to the next thing, 30 days later faced with another crisis, and how quickly I forget God's provision in the past. And I think that is often what is behind my control. And I jump right back to Ian in the driver's seat. Got to have all the answers, got to lead with confidence, got to be in control. And it's like God is gently becoming a father has illuminated this for me. Like, hey, remember when it was okay a month ago? You can trust me again now. And I feel like slowly, emphasis on slowly, that muscle is getting stronger. But I'm so convinced that spiritual formation is way more crock pot than microwave. And I so often want microwave results. And I feel like that's slowly being peeled away, at least in my life.
You said that it's so easy to trust the Lord with our eternity, but not our present. So I wonder if part of the thing that stops us in the formation journey, halts us, slows us down, whatever.
Yeah.
Are we, in a sense, acting as practical atheists in our day-to-day life? In other words, I as soon as you said that, I thought about the scripture. By faith, he inherited the promises. By faith. Okay, what's faith? Well, Hebrews defines faith this way, that faith is the leaning of our entire personalities upon God in absolute trust and confidence in his power, his wisdom, and his goodness. So, in other words, let me connect the thought and then throw it to you. It's easier to trust the Lord with our eternity, but not our present. Why? Yep. And then practical atheism comes into play, where it's like, it's all on me.
Wow.
And that inhibits surrender. Why? I don't know if I've asked a full-formed question, but I think what I'm getting at is this. By faith, by faith. Faith is the vehicle by which we step into, Lord, have your way in me, surrender. By faith, we are able to engage with this process of transformation. And I'll perhaps illustrate it this way and then toss it to you. You were mentioning your boys. Do you think your boys, as an example, have an easier heart posture toward surrender, faith, and formation than you and I do?
I love it. I think some of it has to do with their age right now. I think there's some seasonality to that. But I think there's a lot there, man. I don't think the opposite of faith is doubt. I think the opposite of faith is control. And that, I think, is a distinction for a number of reasons. The way that the church has historically handled doubt has not always been great. And, Frederick Buechner says doubts are like the ants in the pants of faith. It keeps it alive and moving. That's such a silly picture, but I've always resonated with that. And I think for me, the control piece is what I realized was hindering my capacity to fully surrender. And I understand that. I think control is comforting to a degree. It makes us feel like we have agency, which I think that at some level we are designed to have. I thought of, John Kavanaugh years ago was debating a potential big career change. And when Mother Teresa was alive, he thought, if I could just get an audience with Mother Teresa, she'll give me the clarity that I need. He kept using this word clarity. And so, he flew to India and he actually met with Mother Teresa. And she said, what can I do for you? And he said, I want the clarity that you have. And in his retelling of the story, he said that she just laughed at him and said, clarity? I've never had clarity. What I have had, though, is trust. So I will pray that the Lord gives you trust. And that has been such a seismic thing for me, realizing that control and clarity, I think, are cousins. And so often my prayer life looked like, Lord, give me more clarity. I want a more robust blueprint. I'd like more details. If you could send it in a spreadsheet, that would be helpful. Like, that has been the nature of much of my prayer life. And in this season, I feel like God is not necessarily, there's no shame for those types of prayers, but I feel my heart turning toward, Lord, just let me trust you more. I have been asking for every T crossed and every I dotted. And what I really need to bring it back to, I have a little 18-month-old, and the picture that I cannot get out of my head is his arms raised, just asking to be held. And there's just that's trust. And he just deeply longs to be like in my embrace. And he doesn't have to know the details of what that looks like or how long or all of the questions that I'm so prone to ask. And I'm like, Lord, make me, if Jesus is going to say things like, hey, these kids are actually closer to the kingdom than you might think. I have a lot of work to do, I think, to aim my life more towards what I think is a very different target than a lot of us are handed.
Unpack and pull the thread on the fabric of trust more. What is trust? We hear trust in the Lord.
Sure.
But when repeated disappointment happens, or when you're in a dark night season,
yep,
trust sounds nebulous and unattainable.
Sure.
Pull the thread on that, nuance that a bit. Like, what does trust require, and what does embodied trust look like?
Yeah, I think it was Keller who said, it is not the strength of our faith that matters most, but the object. And I think that's tied to it. For much of my life, I thought whether it's faith or trust or it's adjacent, it was like, oh, I need to grow stronger at this. And I do think that's part of formation. That's part of spiritual maturity. Trust, though, I think is beginning to come online to, like, if I had a chair here, it's actually less about my confidence that the chair will hold me up. It's more about, if I sit in it, will the chair actually hold me up? And what, to your question is, I think that we desperately need an expanded definition of what holding up means. If we have no theology of suffering, if we have an image that the way of Jesus is a bed of daisies, and every song is in a major key, and birds whistle to us on our way to, like if that is our picture, and I know that it's not yours, we will very easily feel gypped when any kind of suffering comes our way. And we will be inclined, I think, to say, see, the chair didn't hold me up. When in reality, I think the chair is actually holding us up in a much more profound way. We just don't have categories or eyes to see it. And this is maybe a little blunt. My guess is any spiritual juggernaut that any of you look up to or follow has had a dark night of the soul. Part of the reason that what they say or preach or write resonates is they have gone to the wilderness. I think Henry Nouwen said the great myth of leadership is the thought that anyone can be led out of the desert by someone who's never been there. And I just think I am never at a place where I'm running to the desert. I don't want to go there. Any season in my past, I wouldn't wish it on anyone, and yet it's in the wilderness that my roots went down deepest. And that is it feels contradictory. Like, oh, there's this season in your life you don't ever want to repeat. And yet it's actually in that season that God did some of his most profound work in your heart. And I would say, yes, both are true. And I think that is part of the dichotomy. We run toward comfort and control and clarity. And yet those things tend to be almost the antidote to growth and meaning and formation and maturity. And so for me in this season, again, it's not to become Gnostic or a masochist, but to instead of ask God, why are you letting this happen? I'm learning to ask instead, Lord, where are you in this? I think for so long it was why? Why did I applied for this job and I didn't get it? Or why did I pray for this and it didn't happen? And instead, Lord, tune my heart more to where you are at, even in this. Because if the issue is never whether or not we're in God's presence, we're always in it. What's often lacking is our awareness of it. God, open my eyes to how you are at work right here. Loosen my grip on things that won't ultimately bring purpose or meaning, and help me to cling more fully to you. And that is a very difficult prayer to pray when you're in the midst of it. Just think of the Garden of Gethsemane. Like, Father, if there is any other way, let's do that. And yet, not my will, but yours be done. I want that to be my prayer for the rest of my life.
Rolheiser in The Shattered Lantern wrote, God is always present to us, but we're not always present to him.
Yes.
Isn't that good? And
yes.
When he was on the podcast last month, we traipsed in, and I'd love to have another conversation with him all about the dark night of the soul, but he said this. Check this out. He said, the dark night of the soul is not like a psychological depression. He said, when you're going through the dark night of the soul, you don't take oxygen out of the room, you bring oxygen into the room.
Whoa. That's
because
good.
it's deep formation. So I want to stay here with you though, bro, because you used the phrase theology of suffering. And I want to connect that a little bit to what you were saying about, hey, instead of asking the Lord, why is this happening? Lord, where are you in this dark night? Do we need a refresh then on our theology of suffering, especially in our post-Christian, post-truth, postmodern West? Let's back up and let me ask this first.
Sure.
Pull the thread on and nuance the phrase theology of suffering, and then do we need a refresh on it? What's your take?
Sure. Yeah, I think for a lot of us, it's not even a refresh. It's a 101 starting point. I think you probably have plenty of people that are like, there's no such thing as a theology of suffering. You know, if Christianity is faith for the winners, your best life now, up and to the right, this quarter is better than last quarter. You know what I mean? Like that. There are
Shots
certain.
fired.
There's. Oh, I didn't mean it like that.
No. But it's so good.
You know what I mean? Like if that is the entire rubric, then no, we don't need a theology for a thing that we should never experience or should be running from or is evidence of God's anger.
Whoa. Slow down and go right there. You got to say more about that, folks. Lean in. Ian's about to drop some stuff.
What
This
did I
is
just
huge.
say? I don't even know what I just said.
You were just talking about expectations, and our expectations get steamrolled when we're like, this shouldn't be happening.
Sure. Yes. Yeah. I mean, not to overplay it. I think probably the least quoted verse, and I've certainly never seen it needle stitched on a pillow before, is "In this world you will have trouble." I've not seen a watercolor of that anywhere. No Thomas Kincaid, "In this world you will have trouble." And there is obviously a second half to that. Take heart, I've overcome the world. But that has got to be one of Jesus's least popular promises. Like, can you imagine him being like, "Hey guys, lean in. I got a promise I want to bestow upon you." And they're like, "Great." He's like, "Guess what? You're going to have trouble. You're going to get your teeth kicked in. Like, you're going to get rocked to your core." To me, statements like that undermine entirely the idea that Christianity is meant to be this up and to the right walk in the park. And
The gospel of upward mobility.
literally, the gospel hinges on an opposite direction. We spend all of our time trying to climb these ladders of status, worth, meaning, purpose, whatever. And the image that, if you're even remotely orthodox, we all agree on, is that the God of the universe stepped down from infinity and became an infant, from a throne of endless glory to a cradle in the dirt. And yet we say, big fan of that Jesus, but I would like my life to look the opposite. Like many of us like Jesus, but don't want to become like him. Like he's a great savior, but not a great role model. So we will worship him, and then it's like how he ends the Sermon on the Mount, by the way. He ends it with a very strange story and a warning. And before that, before the house built on rock or sand, he says the wise person, the person living in the kingdom, is not just the person that knows these things, but puts them into practice. He is modeling for us. This is not just an intellectual assent. And that is a really, really difficult thing as a pastor to sit with. Like, that's one of the things that keeps me up at night, is that we would be satisfied to just play church and sing some songs toward Jesus without any interest even in aligning our hearts with him, or following even remotely the Via Dolorosa, the way of. I mean, that is so clearly depicted in my mind. It is so humbling in the truest sense to realize how often that cognitive dissonance for me was allowed to maintain. Like, Lord, I love you, love what you've done. I'd like my life to look the opposite. That's embarrassing to admit, man, but much of my adult life could be categorized exactly that way.
How do we steward this well, though? So I'm thinking about, recognizing what Jesus said. In this world you will have trouble, but be of good cheer. I've overcome the world.
Yep.
Theology of suffering, as we're saying here. How do we not overextend this and become fatalistic?
Yes.
And instead cling to the promises of the Lord, recognize Hebrews 13, I will never leave you, forsake you. Recognize that all his promises are true and good. Recognize that, like Psalm 25, I think it's 13 or 14, says, all the paths of the Lord are mercy and steadfast love. The promises of the Lord, I think there are like 7,000 promises in the scriptures. All of those are good and true. How do we steward this message well? Because I don't want people to think, oh, I'm just going to have a fatalistic, whatever happens, approach to life. Nor is it I'm just going to be passive now.
Yep.
Walk us through the tension, the posture, and the stewarding of what has to happen on the inside so that we can go, you are a faithful God. You're a God of promise. You're not a man that you could even lie. God is no respecter of person. Like, we can read through the promises of the word, and that's good and true. But how do we walk this so we don't become fatalistic and go, I'm just a cynic, and eternity is going to be better? Obviously, it will be.
Yes. A quick response to cynicism. Cynicism is self-fulfilling scarcity. And if the kingdom of God is a kingdom of abundance, then there is no place for self-actualizing, self-fulfilling scarcity. Scarcity has no place in the kingdom, full stop. I also think, like James, the brother of Jesus, has a unique vantage point. As someone who grew up with Jesus, I think the words that he chose to write have a very particular, unique edge to them. He says, hey, actually, don't just endure it, consider it pure joy. And here's why, though. You don't run after it. You can consider it pure joy because it's producing something in us. It actually is the trials. It is the hardships that will lead you. And he says some version of maturity. You'll be mature and complete. And what's so wild to me is that, like in fitness, we understand this principle. All growth comes through resistance, right? Like if I was to go lift weights, that's resistance. And that's how you grow. And yet I think spiritually, emotionally, resistance is not typically the kind of thing that most of us are very open to because I don't know, maybe it's because we don't see the value. Maybe we don't actually believe James. Maybe we don't actually think that trials and temptations actually produce anything. Maybe it doesn't produce perseverance. I think if not, to tie it back to trust, I think without trust, it does create cynicism. I think that is the linchpin for the lens by which we see suffering. Because the truth is, it's happening either way. Again, to the parable of the two houses, the storm hit both the houses. Jesus is really honest about the human condition. He's like, listen, both houses get hit. That part is unavoidable. What is avoidable is the kind of foundation you're building on. And I think we live in an age, man, where people glorify the house and no one really asks about the foundation. The house is the fun stuff. That is what everyone sees. I mean, as best we can tell, the two houses look the same in a similar area. Foundation, that is silence and Sabbath and solitude and suffering. Those are the things that are there's not a lot of cheerleaders on the road to foundational types of things. And so for James to say, it's going to happen. You're going to face things. How you perceive them will determine whether or not it produces in you perseverance. And that perseverance is the vehicle by which God grows you to maturity and complete. The New Testament is replete with examples of maturity, growing up to maturity and completeness. And I think that is, we do probably have to be honest that at times maybe we just don't simply believe him, you know?
So true. Okay, I'm going to paint a picture,
Okay.
And we can just kind of parse this out because we are talking about formation today. So formation, like formation of our bodies, requires resistance. James says, consider it pure joy whenever you encounter trials of various kinds. The trial doesn't test our character. It tests our faith.
Whoa.
And we've established earlier, based upon how Hebrews, I think it's Hebrews 4, defines faith. Faith is, in a way, synonymous with trust. So could we say that it's really the testing of our trust?
Wow.
And the trust establishes scaffolding by which the formation happens and is built around our spirits and souls. And could I propose, therefore, back to where you started today, that formation then is more about receiving than doing. And receiving is not passive.
Yes.
It is active.
Yep. Yeah, I think this is a masterclass that you should put in another book because that is...
I'm working on book number 2 right now.
Come on. Shoot, let's just talk about that. No, I think you're... I mean, again, it's kitschy, but I maybe said it on a previous podcast. The difference between bearing fruit and producing it is so significant. I spent so much of my early adult years trying to duct tape fruit to a plastic tree. Like, see, look at, there's fruit. There's fruit.
What do you mean by that?
It is. I knew the metrics that would garner the most accolades. Like I know generally what fruit's supposed to look like. I know generally what a tree is. So if I can sort of duct tape and manufacture, like I went and they don't need to know I bought it from a store. And there's a certain sense of like, I need to make this happen. When the invitation of John 15 is, if you're not abiding in the vine, a branch striving really hard to grow a grape is not really going to do anything. If that branch isn't first infused and abiding, dwelling, making its home in, then the output then will at best, but he also is pretty blunt in John 15, like, apart from me, you can do nothing. I've done the Greek word studies. I wish that word didn't mean nothing. I really wanted it to mean something different. and again, I had to share this with our church a couple months ago. I was like, I don't think I believed that either. There was a real sense of like, apart from him, I could still get some things done. I can still, there was a belief in my own grit, my own ingenuity, my own, I don't know, skill set. So the idea of receiving, but also receiving not being passive, in the same way that waiting isn't, or, there's so much that I think has been cast aside where it's either a let go and let God posture, right? Which is pseudo-fatalistic, like, well, I'm not going to change anything anyway. Or it's the weight of the universe is on my shoulders, so I cut everyone else out of my life because the goal is so important. And I think it's way more pedals on a bicycle. It is God reveals and convicts, and then I respond with obedience. And then God offers you a word through someone else, and then I do the honest heart work of confessing the way that he tells us that we're supposed to. And I think that there's even beauty in hearing in our own voice confession. I don't think it's some legalistic hocus pocus that when you say these things, something happens. But when you hear your own words in your voice, I think there's a real healing that happens, and being honest about, yeah, this is what I've been facing, or where I've been at, or what I've been clinging to, or what I've been striving for, or this has been my posture towards this season or this suffering. I've hated it, and I'd actually wish it to go away. I think all of that belongs. And that is the path to abiding that I found, that doesn't just simply look like being a monk on a mountaintop and talking to no one. That's what I always kind of pictured. And I think it's such a flat picture, such a flat understanding of abiding that has only recently really come alive for me, I think.
We're back to trust in a way, and I wonder, bro, if trust is truly a meta-narrative. I hadn't planned it to be this way, but like a meta-narrative of this conversation. So I find it interesting. John 14:27, peace I leave you. My very own peace I give to you. Not as the world gives do I give to you. The Amplified Bible translation then has this parenthetical note that says, stop allowing yourselves to be agitated and disturbed. Okay. I think it's something like 11 verses after that statement. He says, I'm the vine, you're the branches, abide in me. What are your thoughts on my peace I leave you, I give and bequeath to you, not as the world gives do I give.
Right.
Stop allowing yourselves to be agitated and disturbed. And then 11 verses later, abide in me. Apart from me, you can do nothing. I'm the vine, you're the branches. So connect agitation, distrust, an independent spirit. We'll throw cynicism back in the mix.
Sure.
To a proclivity to keep the heck away from the vine. In other words, we can detach ourselves from the vine, and we become a branch that's just on its own, right?
Yep. I'd
love to connect the thought of peace I leave with you to, apart from me, you got nothing going on, bro.
I love that. I think it's Colossians 3. Paul says something like, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. And I remember years ago reading a commentator, and his assertion was that the word rule there is the same derivative that we would get like for the word umpire.
Exactly right.
Someone calling the shots in some sort of sporting event. And his whole kind of riff was so memorable. He's like, let the peace of Christ call the shots in your life. You might be arguing, you might be kicking dirt over home plate, like, no, I'm sure he was out. I'm sure whatever it is. Like, I'm taking that analogy too far, but being a Lions fan, I've been feeling a lot of that, a lot of that angst.
I'm not ready to talk
Is that
about
too
it.
soon? I'm sorry. Neither am I.
My sister called me. My sister called me this morning. She's like, "We're gonna watch the Super Bowl this week," and I was like, "No, I'm not even gonna watch it." She's like, "No, like, I'm not ready to talk about it." Brock
I don't
Purdy's
think I am
good.
either, man.
You and I were texting last Sunday night or
We
something.
were.
I think you 24/7 at the half.
Bro.
Not only could they have won, they should have. But
Bro. Well, and we have evening services too. So when I left our final evening service, it was just going into halftime. And I was cloud nine. I was high-fiving people, and people were like, "See you in the Super Bowl." And then I went home and watched the second half and cried into my macaroni and cheese. Anyway, where were we? Oh, yes. The peace of Christ ruling. Peace of Christ. I'd never heard that. When I hear rule, I think of like I think dominion. I think a king. I think that's also true. But to think about, and I've thought about this so many times since, where in my life am I relying too much on my own perception, my own understanding of a circumstance, and saying, this is horrible, this is irredeemable, this shouldn't be happening, and God has been whispering, no, let the peace of Christ call the shots here. Let it rule, let it umpire in this circumstance.
wait, are you saying that perhaps we are too quick and we shouldn't say, why is this happening? Like, in other words, slow down, and our perspective could be recalibrated and thus create a redefinition of the very thing we're walking through that we think we shouldn't be walking through because we don't deserve to be walking through this.
Absolutely.
And when the peace of Christ rules.
Yes.
In fact, here, let's just do this. Here's Colossians 3:15 in the Amplified. And let the peace, soul harmony, which comes from Christ, rule, act as umpire continually in your hearts. Ian, get ready for this, because this is the question we all ask. Why is this happening now? Why is this happening to me again? So let the peace from Christ rule, act as umpire continually in your hearts. Here it is. Deciding and settling with finality all questions that arise in your minds.
Wow. That's it.
So peace is a commodity. And peace does what to our anxious souls bent toward rebellion when we are in the crucible? Peace is a commodity that does what to us from the inside out, in our nervous systems, in our spirits, that actually allows formation to happen in the most thorough and effective way possible for the sake of His glory and our good.
Okay, so I'm thinking of two examples in the New Testament where someone says to Jesus, Lord, don't you care? Don't you care, Lord? Two examples. There might be more, but the two that I'm thinking of, the disciples are in a boat caught in a storm, and Jesus is doing what? He's just napping. He's conked. Lord, don't you care that we're drowning? The second is Mary and Martha. Mary is just simply at the feet of Jesus. Martha, I'm assuming, is frantically preparing. The good, holy work of hospitality, by the way. She's doing what is expected and says, Lord, don't you care? Don't you care that my sister's just, what is she doing? Just hanging out with you? Just being with you? That sounds a lot like abiding, by the way, if you ask me. The irony of asking the God of the universe, don't you care, to me is just so rich. But those two examples, he's napping in a storm, and he is honoring the one who is choosing to simply abide. And our anxious instinct is, Lord, what is this? What's going on? Why are you not intervening? Either helping us with this boat or telling my sister to get to work. I resonate with both of those instincts. Lord, make the storm go away. What are you doing? Right? These are the Psalms of lament. Lord, have you lost track of me? Have you forgotten me? How long, O Lord? Those are the echoes of the lament Psalms. And then Martha, who is doing, by the way, not just the expected thing, but most would, I think, say the right thing, welcoming them in. She's doing all the things. Mary is actually doing a very scandalous thing, to be at the feet of a rabbi. And so she says, Lord, don't you care? And Jesus' response is essentially, no, not really. And that is so unsettling to, I think, our anxious, particularly accomplished, production-minded posture or solution-minded posture. There's this storm. What am I supposed to do in this? Why are you letting this happen? How could you be sleeping at a time like this? I have felt that way towards God more times than I'd like to admit. And I think both are actually a masterclass in the peace of Christ not ruling, not calling the shots in our kind of preconceived ideas of what this should all be looking like, you know?
Yeah, so let's connect this back. You said earlier, we were talking about in John 15, he says, apart from me, you can do nothing.
Yeah.
And if we're honest, we're like, wait a minute, I can do some things.
Yeah, right.
So the disconnect of the word nothing is a little like, what? That doesn't make sense. So I'd like to propose, therefore, that what we call something, he calls nothing.
Oh, dude.
So what is the fabric then? What is the fabric, the DNA, and the makeup of something that he calls that something?
Gosh darn it, man.
Because we have to play with this disconnect, because we're like, wait a minute, I can produce something. And he's like, no, apart from me, you can do nothing. So therefore, he defines our something as nothing apart from him. Therefore, it presupposes the fact that we should be smart enough to then say, Lord, what is your fabric, definition, and DNA of something?
Should it really surprise us that the economy of God is so upside down from what we expect? You know, I think even, I work in a church, and there are certain metrics, things that we measure for better or for worse. There are certain things that often people will want to see happening or whatever, usually well-intended. And then I look at Jesus, and he's talking about mustard seeds and yeast and dough and children. And you know what I mean? Like he just continues to almost poke this bear of y'all are so intertwined with empire, you can't even see what the kingdom looks like. You're so married to these metrics, exactly to your point of what something is. I mean, is that not the gospel? That when he says, poor in spirit, the reason that the poor in spirit are blessed, there's a particular blessing when you realize how spiritually bankrupt you actually are. Part of the hurdle for so many of us is we have not yet come face to face with just truly how bankrupt we are. We do think, and maybe we would never say it out loud because we know this would be a faux pas, but we, in the back of our minds, we're thinking, God is pretty lucky to have me on his team, though. I bring some unique skills to the table like that. And it's not to discredit skills, talents, gifts, placement, ability, any of that. But it is not until we recognize we are not coming to the cross arms full of all the great things we can do and accomplish for Jesus, but arms empty and saying, God, while I was still a sinner, you came after me. Son of David, have mercy on me. That is the place of blessing. We have so co-opted blessing to mean everything that we want it to mean. The word blessed or blessing shows up 112 times in the New Testament. Not once is it connected to material wealth. So that at the very least should tell us that our economies are often very out of tune with God's and look very much like everything else's. And I think that's part of what Jesus is getting at. Like, you think that you're doing something, and that's, in terms of like, if the writer of Ecclesiastes is right, that God has planted eternity in the heart of every human, there's an eternal perspective that is just entwined in our ontology. He's saying, yeah, you could do a bunch of things here and then stop breathing 80, 90 years later and then be done with it. But the things that actually have eternal significance, which is the thing that actually ultimately matters, the kingdom of heaven here on earth, then I could see why he might say, man, apart from me, it's what is it? You could do nothing.
We're sort of putting together this rubric for formation, and we're talking about trust. We're talking about a posture of apart from me, you can do nothing, which requires a level of surrender and a theology of suffering that doesn't aggrandize suffering, for he is not the author of destruction, but instead uses all things, wastes nothing.
Yes.
Shaking, resistance training, form us, shape our faith, which fortifies our trust. Could it be said as another layer to our equation today that poor in spirit is the posture of formation, effective formation? So like Matthew 5, I'm reading right here, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom. Here's why I want to propose that, and just toss it back to you to see what you think. But okay,
Shoot.
If poor in spirit is the posture of effective formation, the return on that, the return on poor in spirit, they get the whole kingdom.
Yes. Wow.
So here's the statement, and then I'll toss it to you. Could it be that this formation journey is, Father, what do you want me to receive? How can I posture my heart?
Yes.
And the biggest shift that happens for a lot of us is that he is actually better than we think he is.
Bro.
Is this a retooling of the goodness of the Lord? And this is cornerstone theology for effective formation. You are better than I think. You are better than I think.
And that will always be true. This is what I think frees Paul up to use words like mystery as often as he does. We do not have a good relationship with mystery. We like certainty. We like buttoned up, tight air systems. And I understand all of that. I'm wired for much of that. I wonder if for Paul, if for John, if for James, it just kept getting deeper. God, you are even better than I thought that I had arrived. Honestly, that's the kind of like pastor and shepherd I hope to be, is that, man, just when I think I've understood, Lord, deeper waters, Lord. And then, okay. And I think you're right. The notion, that's so, I feel like I'm seeing the Beatitudes in a completely different light, because we will take them and turn them into steps, right? Great. Right? How do I need to become more poor or more meek? It's like, no. The divine benediction rests on people like this. And that can be so unnerving. It is for me, to be honest. I don't want to suffer. I don't want to run to poor in spirit. Meek people get run over. I'm a hustler. I got to make it happen. I have to produce fruit, not bear it. Like God's timeline is maybe not quite caught up to mine. And there's a very real part of confession there that I think is uglier than I thought. But also found that like God both knows me best and loves me most. Like the one from whom I can't hide anything is the deeper waters. So I'm freed to no longer I get to opt out of the rat race of trying to appear more successful or put together or righteous or holy or any of that. The cross frees us from all of that, because it's actually the poor in spirit. It is the recognition, Lord, I could do nothing to clean myself up enough. And yet you came after me, and not reluctantly, but as a good father says, come. The fact that we are invited to participate in the kingdom at all. If the whole goal, by the way, was for us just to simply go to heaven when we die, why would we not just all go there at the moment of conversion? If the whole goal was worship, why would we not go to heaven where worship is perfect and unending? If it was fellowship, why would we not be where we're in the presence of, if there wasn't actually something that we were meant to participate in here and now, why would any of us even still be here? And I think that is such what a wild invitation, that God would not only love us enough to save us from sin, death, and darkness, but also say, and guess what? You're invited to the party. Go bring others in. Tell them there's a seat with their name on it. Like, proclaim this banquet. I don't know. That's a wild thing to me.
You were talking 2 weeks ago about hurry sickness. I tend to think that people who are meek aren't really prone to hurry sickness. You can take that wherever you want. I loved that message, by the way. I'll put that in the show notes.
Oh, hey, thanks, man. I think meekness is so counter the dream that so many of us were told to pursue. Or maybe not the dream, but the vehicle by which we accomplish the dream, right? Throw an elbow at all cost. Throw a coworker under the bus if it means getting the promotion. Self-promote so that you grow a platform. Look out for number one. Could there be any more counter-gospel message than look out for number one? For me and mine, for my own little kingdom, my own. If the gospel is radical hospitality, God throwing the doors wide open of the best banquet any of us ever been to, then the arrogance of keep away from my stuff or look at me, I mean, it is so counter the way of Jesus. And I think part of why it's hard for us to discern that is because the road to self-promotion is aligned with cheerleaders. Look at him growing this church or growing this platform, and I'm not knocking any of those things. But when we begin to measure our kingdom alignment with who's on the road cheering us, you're going to have to reconcile that with the story of Jesus. You know what I mean? When we say, yeah, it's going to always be up and to the right, and the more accolades, the better, and the bigger the audience. You know, we're in election years, and it's so funny because we'll notice this: the closer it gets to election day, the more vague the messaging gets because they're trying to cast a wider and wider net. We want more. You just watch it; it gets more and more vague, more and more nebulous. Jesus does the opposite. His crowds start to get smaller and smaller, and he's like, "Hey, eat my flesh and blood." And people are like, "I was with you at the loaves and fish thing, but this is too much, too weird." And he seems fine with that. He seems fine with, actually, this whole upside down thing is going to be really unappealing to a lot of you. Poor in spirit, meek, merciful, suffering. People are like, why are you beginning the sermon like this? That's so. Imagine if any of us began sermons like that. We would not be invited back. You know what I mean? And that, at the very least, should concern us. If we preached like Jesus, we probably wouldn't be invited back. That disconnect, I think.
That's not in the church growth seminar.
Yeah, right. And again, I'm not specifically knocking any particular approach or strategy, you know, but if I get one more email that says grow your church from 100 to 1,000 in 48 hours, I'm like, I don't think that's the point. Like, what if it was less grow your church from 100 to 1,000 and more grow your church from spectator to disciple? Like, can we get more of those, please? And I think we're saying the quiet part out loud when it is numbers at all cost, exposure at all cost, book deals at all costs, reach at all cost. I'm like, I don't think any of those things are necessarily evil, but Jesus does seem to set our sights on different types of targets. And at the very least, maybe we need to be more honest about we're just not interested in that target.
So as we land this plane, perhaps one of the keys to effective formation is actually realizing a different target. Perhaps a lot of the frustration and the striving and the insecurity has been mobilized by we're aiming at the wrong target, and we think spiritual disciplines and formation, that's like the hottest new thing to get stripes on my jacket. And we're like, no.
Yes. Wow.
It is the thing. One of the things that I think, this podcast is not about, church growth or anything like that, but one of the things I've been observing in the Western church is that somehow we've had this two-tiered approach. It's like, show up, we want you to come to church, attend or consumer, and all of a sudden, like, discipleship is this graduated thing, and that would make no sense to writers of the New Testament. They're like,
Right.
what? Disciple, apprentice is
Yes.
first step.
Yes. Wow.
I don't know. I don't know if I should have said that, but whatever. I think it's.
I love it.
Well, because you're right. My prayer for the body of Christ is, and this has nothing. I love the local church. I believe in the local church. I feel called to the local church.
Yes.
My prayer and burden is that, number one, we would be people who are consumed and burning for prayer. We put the presence back at the center. And in so doing, the model and approach shifts from a tender consumer to disciple, priesthood of believers, equipping of the saints to do the work of the ministry.
Absolutely.
Why? That we would all grow into really mature manhood, like Ephesians 4 says, that we would be in equal proportion to the head, who is Christ. And there perhaps is a good target for formation. Today we've talked about surrender. We've talked about a theology of suffering. We've talked about faith being synonymous with trust. We've talked about the posture of effective formation. We've talked about how apart from him we can do nothing, and we're saying, wait a minute, but we can. And he's saying, yeah, but I call your something nothing. Run a thread through this for us, Ian. Where are we going to land this plane today in telling people formation is not like a 200 or 300 level class, and we're like, nah, formation is it, man.
Yes.
And with everything I've been walking through in the last 9 months, I've been pretty candid, super candid with friends like you, but candid here on the podcast to say, we all encounter these dark nights. What's quick to go is all the superfluous stuff, the soul attachments. I don't know.
Yes.
What do you got to say to that? Let's land this plane and give people a distillation of today.
Yeah, I think there's so many things that I would love to say next time. The New Testament knows no such thing as a spectator Christian. It's not a category. It doesn't exist. And so to your point, like, well, that's the ropes level course if I want to graduate into apprenticeship to Jesus. That's it. Like, followers of the way, which, by the way, is not understanders of the way or pontificators of the way. There's all sorts of mystery, all sorts of, that doesn't make sense to me. Followers of the call, the invitation to leave our nets, follow me. And he doesn't leave us there, right? He says, I will make you into something, and you're going to live on mission. We've been talking about the table the last couple of months, and that's been maybe the most shocking thing. Is I was like, listen, our strategy as a church is not my sermons, it's not our music, it's you. Like, living faithfully where God has placed you, like praying, Lord, at this table as it is in heaven. Like, there are going to be people that say, it's not for me. I'm more interested in a church to entertain me, and we will love them, and I will. You know what I mean? And I think that but we're at a point even as a community where we're saying, yeah, I think maybe the spectator thing needs to go away. And I think that churches in particular, we need to be really honest, even about our architecture. We build buildings that look like theaters, and then we're surprised when people behave like spectators. We got to be really honest about, hey, we can't just include this in sermons. What we measure, what we finance, are we serious about this Ephesians 4 equipping the saints thing or not? And I think you're right. Discipleship is having a bit of a moment right now. Formation is having a bit of a moment. I pray to God it's not just a fad. I think we desperately need it. I think we have a lot to learn from the global church, to be honest. And that's not to say that there's not still a lot of room for creative expression and how it's executed. But I think it is the thing. I think if we can get a vision for not necessarily aiming at big, grand, dramatic, but the ordinary way that we live our lives, that we interact with our neighbors, that we talk to our coworkers, that we use our finances, the way that we, you know what I mean? Like, I think that there's, the J.D. Salinger in Catcher in the Rye says the mark of an immature man is that he wants to like die nobly for a cause, and the mark of a mature man is that he wants to live humbly for one. That is, I think we need a whole lot more of. If I never go out in a blaze of glory, if no one ever knows my name, Lord, help me to be faithful with whatever resources you've given me. Help me to be meek. Help me to reflect your kingdom in all of these ordinary common spaces, to be yeast and dough, to be a mustard seed. You know, I think that is I think the vision is coming into clarity, at least for us here as a community. And it's really exciting, but also really, really, it can be unsettling because it feels very foreign in a lot of ways. But I think that's the path forward.
1 Thessalonians 4:10, yet we urge you, brothers and sisters, to do so more and more, and to make it your ambition, not to build a platform, not to extend your influence, not to drop the tweetable phrases. Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. You should mind your own business and work with your hands just as we told you, so that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders, and so that you will not be dependent on anybody. Perhaps formation is because having been formed, we can transform. Thanks for being here today. You are one of my favorite people. I love when we can just have these conversations. I think I asked you 3 prepared questions. We actually recorded comments about the Lions, and that's going to stay. Next year's coming. Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn are both staying in their respective positions.
Yes, sir.
Jared Goff is negotiating a longer contract. Restore the roar in 24.
Man, speaking of faith, let's go. Let's go.
Meanwhile, this Sunday, I will watch with a little knot in my stomach all the more. It's all good.
I'm right there with you. Right there with you.
All it cost us, that loss last week, all it cost us was the Detroit Pistons win. They're terrible, and they happened to win last Sunday. Like, couldn't we have traded this somehow? Because they're terrible.
Exactly.
They're
horrible trade-off.
They're 6-40. Like, what? Like, no, I can't say that on the podcast. Chris, chill. There was nope, can't say that either.
Wow, look at that. So mature, so developed, so evolved.
It's my aim to live a peaceable, quiet life. So I'm gonna stay quiet. Dude, love you, bro. Thanks for being here today. Anything else? Anything else?
Nah, man, I don't. It's hard to add to perfection.
Oh, come on. Whatever.
Perfect ending. I don't need to muddy it with anything else, dude. I think the world of you.
Thanks, bro.
So grateful for you and what you're doing. Honored to be a part of this conversation.
Likewise. Yeah, we'll do it again sometime soon.
Count me in, man.
All right, buddy.